I met my husband when we were in college together. I was working on my bachelor's degree, helping out in the library for some needed extra cash, when I first laid eyes on him. He was not the usual sort of man I fancied, more bookish than muscly. I found him charming in his own way, and we struck up a friendship. He told me he was a writer, that he was working on a book of short stories to submit to a publishing house. I offered to read them, and from that moment on, I became his biggest fan. His stories were so visceral. He wrote not as a writer, but as a first-hand observer, and it wasn't long before his work was noticed. We were living together by then, our library friendship having blossomed into something more, and I could see how giddy he was when the letters came in from Bowding Publishing. When he read how they wanted to publish his book, I think it was the proudest moment of his life. He kept writing for Bowding, his stories finding a niche with the horror community. He also started selling his pieces to magazines and online sources, getting his name out there and becoming more recognizable. As his fame grew, however, he still jokingly called me his biggest fan. I couldn't argue with him. I genuinely loved his work. He wrote the sort of stories that were genuinely terrifying and enticed the reader to keep reading until the very end. As his stories grew in number, I found myself curious about where they all came from. My husband, we'll call him Michael, was a mild-mannered fellow who had never really experienced anything horrifying in his life. He described his childhood as benign, no broken bones or funny uncles. His family was loving and doted on him constantly. He had never been without. He had never really suffered, and I found myself very curious about where all these nightmares came from in such a beautiful mind. Then, over drinks one night, he told me. He didn't like to talk about, where he got the stories from, not when he was sober. He always said that discussing the creative process was boring, or that his story's technical aspects would bore me to tears. I wasn't fooled, though. Beneath his jokes was something colder, something fearful. So one night I pressed him. He still didn't really want to talk about it, but I persisted. Finally, after a lot of coaxing and some strong whiskey, he all but blurted his answer to me. I wish now that I hadn't asked. "It's the door," he said, and at that moment he seemed almost afraid of his own words. The door? I was confused by the queerness of his answer. What do you dream about? He asked the question so suddenly, I was taken by surprise. Oh, I don't know. Normal things, I guess. What I did the day before, movies I've watched, weird things my mind cooks up. I've only ever had the same dream my entire life. It's always the same. It never changes. It's where I get all my ideas. I leaned forward, intrigued by what he was telling me. He seemed emboldened by my attention. The door lies in space. At least I believe it must be space. It floats in a great void, and every night I visit it. I float through this void naked, an umbilicus connecting me to whatever lies beyond. Every night I approach the door, and every night it whispers to me through the keyhole. Do you remember the little journal on my bedside? I nodded, begging him to go on with my eyes. I've trained myself to write the things I hear while sleeping. Sometimes I see pictures or faces when I look through the keyhole. Sometimes I hear terrible words spoken by creatures I imagine to be beyond my description. Sometimes I have to close my eyes and will myself awake because I'm afraid that the things they tell me will drive me insane. When I wake up, I read what I've written down, which becomes my stories. I was shocked. So all your stories come from this big door in space? He smiled at me. It sounds silly when you say it like that, but yes, everything I've ever written was spoken to me by something on the other side of that door. I didn't think anything of it the next day. We'd been drunk, and he had just spouted off something to make me shut up. I was sure of it. I became more aware of his journal, though. Sometimes at night he would wake me up with the scritch-scratch of his pen on the page. I didn't like to look at him when he was writing it. It was like something otherworldly had taken his strings and was using him without his permission. Watching him write in that fugue state made me feel uncomfortable, and I took measures not to be awake while it was going on. I didn't think anything else of this. Not until about 3 months ago. That was when he started having the nightmares. His work had always been creepy, always terrifying, but now it took on an alarming quality. He began talking about creatures that lived beyond the door. These creatures sounded more than a little Lovecraftian, and he was assured that their presence on Earth was an affront to the natural order. They came and went, their arrivals marked by some with great portents, and their battles had shaped history. The stories weren't the only thing that changed, though. He began to sleep poorly. His sleep had always been placid, peaceful, but now he thrashed and mumbled in his sleep. He whimpered in the night about the pale lady or the green man and the riotous red that surged like blood. The words he wrote in his journal were unreadable, a foreign language, but he sat and scribbled them, transcribed them every morning like a dutiful follower of some religion. He began to change. His eyes bore huge bags. He was jumpy and unsure of himself, and more than once I caught him catnapping fitfully during the day. His writing, however, was more in demand than ever. The magazines he wrote for wanted more stories about these strange old ones. His editor wanted to publish a compilation of them at once. He had no lack of material for the book, but I began to get worried about his health as he proceeded. We had been married for 2 years then, just starting to make a life together, and I was afraid that his candle would burn out before mine. I asked him one night to stop writing the stories. He was at his computer, typing away dutifully, when I made the request. He turned his head to look at me, haunted eyes boring into mine, and laughed for the first time in weeks. It wasn't his laugh, though. The laughter was jagged and full of despair, humor shared only by the damned. He laughed like a madman. I can't. If I stop writing, they won't like it. Who? I asked in confusion. The ones behind the door. They've marked me as their chronicler. I can't stop until the job is done. These things are killing you. Can't you see that, Michael? He slumped over his keyboard, resting his head against it, making a line of letters as he did so. Don't you think I would if I could? If I could stop, I would give so much to stop. The things they tell me, no one should have to know these things. It's fruit from the poison tree, and I wish I did not have the knowledge that they've given me. Then stop, I said suddenly. Just stop writing. Tell them you refuse to write their story. He looked horrified. Refuse them? I've never refused a story before. What if it stops the door from working? I turned him in his chair and pulled him to me. The door is in your mind, love. The way it manifests is nothing more than your own mind working through your stories. The monsters are of your own making. You control them. They don't control you. At that moment, he looked relieved. He hugged me back and seemed on the verge of tears. I don't think he had ever thought of those nightly excursions as anything but in a literal sense. He had never imagined that these things could be of his own creation, and the knowledge had made him feel free. I'll tell them tonight then, he said with a smile on his face. I'll tell them that I don't want to write about them anymore. I'll tell Fred that I don't want to continue these stories in the morning. He won't like it, but he'll understand. He went to bed then, and I figured that would be the end of the nightmares. I was wrong. He woke me in the middle of the night screaming. The back of his hand hit me in the face, and I rolled awake to the sound of him screaming. He was thrashing around, clutching his stomach and kicking his legs frantically. I tried to wake him. I know everything says not to do that, but I wanted him to wake up. I slapped his face. I threw water on him. I screamed his name, but nothing worked. Someone banged on the door, but I ignored them. I tried in every way I could to help my husband. Finally, he helped himself. We were in the ER. The knocking person had called the paramedics, and they had burst in. They thought someone was being murdered, but they loaded him up and took him straight to the hospital when they saw what was going on. He lay in an ER bed, screaming and kicking until they finally restrained him. He went right on thrashing and yelling until nearly 4 in the morning. Then he gasped loudly, like a diver coming up from a deep depth, and seemed to come awake. "They cut my umbilicus," he said in a tone of the most profound sorrow. They moved him upstairs later that day. The doctor who talked to him was afraid that he might hurt himself, and I was a little worried too. For the next 2 days, he sat strapped to a hospital bed, fighting sleep. He couldn't sleep, he told me, because he would have no way back without his umbilicus. I would be lost forever, and my consciousness would float forever in that void. He told me how he had told the thing behind the door that he would no longer write its story. I had assured him that it was all in his head, that it was a product of his imagination. When it had burst through the door and screamed, he knew it was all too real. He had run then, fled across the void, but the creature had wings and it had chased him. It defies description. Its legs were equine, its head like living rock, its body was made of stars. I don't know, dear. Its mouth was full of fiery teeth, and when it lunged at me, I could do nothing but flee. As he had run, the thing had slashed at him. The clawed hand had torn at his umbilicus. Michael said a pain like a rending scythe had torn through his belly, and as he writhed, he could see the fiery teeth sever the root from him. He had caught the end then, using the last of his strength to grab the trailing end, and pulled himself out of the dark place, a little at a time. He was afraid after that, afraid to go back, afraid of what might be waiting there for him. He fought sleep for the next 3 days. He would nod and awaken, but it seemed harder for him to come back every time. He begged his doctor for caffeine pills, for coffee, for anything to keep him awake, but the doctors thought sleep would be the best drug for him. They fiddled with the idea of sedating him, but I forbade it. When they threatened to get the police involved, thinking I was somehow responsible for this, I threatened to call a lawyer. Finally, we reached a shaky standoff. It was moot after day 3. I lost the fight first, drifting off as I sat by his bedside. When I awoke, he was gone. He's in the ICU now. His coma is deep, and the doctors are afraid he might have suffered a stroke. They don't know about his nightly travels. Wouldn't believe me if I told them. But I know what's been happening to him. He's adrift in the void now, maybe already dead at the hands of this elder thing, and there's nothing I can do to get him back. But maybe there is something you all can do. My husband could not be the only one traveling to this place. Some of you must have heard the whispers through the door as well. If you see this door, and if you find my husband, please bring him back. I don't know how you would, but please try. And if the creatures on the other side of the door talk to you about things from the other side, please do yourself a favor and listen to them. Don't ever stop listening to them. I wish I had never told him to stop listening. The price you pay for ignoring them might be your life. The price might even be steeper than that. My friends and I like to take what we call an adventure weekend about 3 times a year. We met in college while we were brothers in Pi Beta Kappa. There's Jared, Max, and Raj, and me, of course. PBC is a forever kind of brotherhood, but we took it a little more seriously than most. We all live in different parts of the United States, but 3 times a year, we come together for these 3 to 5 day trips that are just epic. We've gone ziplining in Costa Rica, mountain climbing in the Rockies, whitewater rafting in Mexico, and diving in the Bahamas. We've been all over the world, and though it may seem a little excessive, so what? We're 4 unmarried guys with no kids and great jobs, so our income is still pretty much ours to blow as we see fit. So when Max said we should get a houseboat and go trolling up the coast for 5 days, we were all on board, pun definitely intended. So we met at a little port in Mississippi as he introduced us to the Trawler Queen. She was a 2-cabin houseboat with a living room, a party deck, 2 monster motors, and a galley with enough beer and snacks to keep the party going for 7 days and 6 nights. We were stoked, to say the least, and as Max pulled us out of the marina, we knew this was going to be an adventure for the books. That statement would prove to be a little too prophetic. I haven't really properly introduced the guys yet, and it's important that you get the group dynamic down. Me and Jared were the jocks of the group, a pair of gym rats who were constantly on the grind for the perfect physique. Max was our resident cool guy, just a chill dude who liked to party and usually organized our little adventures. Raj was our brain, and most of us probably wouldn't have graduated without him. He was probably the smartest guy in the frat, and he'd helped a lot of us keep our GPAs up so we could keep our various grants and scholarships. We all had our parts to play, like the A-team, and each of us made up for some shortcoming in the group. Max had charted our course so that we could stop sometimes and spend our nights partying in different ports. Biloxi, Long Beach. Finally, we'd end up in New Orleans, where we'd turn the boat into the rental company and get a car back to our original dock so we could get our cars. It was a good plan, but Raj pointed out that his route took us through several large shipping lanes that would likely bring us close to larger shipping vessels, which, were the ones that used them. They'd probably capsize us if we got too close. Might be better to stick to the less busy waterways if we expect to get the deposit back on our rented houseboat. Max brushed it off. If we take these routes, we're better suited to stop in the party ports. Come on, Raj, live a little. Raj furrowed his brow, but he didn't argue. Roger McCormick, an underprofessor at the college that we graduated half a decade ago, might not be a risk taker, but Raj had learned long ago to roll with the punches when it came with us. It usually came out okay, and Raj enjoyed the adventure as much as the rest of us. We had been out about 3 days, preparing to stop in Gulfport and take on provisions before heading to New Orleans, when we saw something strange in the water. Well, not that strange, I guess. After all, it's not really uncommon to see a rubber duck in the water. It's kinda where they hang. Most of the time it's bathtubs or sinks, though, and not off the coast of Louisiana. I was manning the wheel, playing captain while Max went and took a break, and when I first saw it, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I wouldn't have seen it at all if it wasn't fluorescent orange and riding a huge wave. It was just one at first, a single little guy bobbing on the waves and smiling happily, but as I watched, I saw more of them come up on a swell. They were ducks. Some of them with sunglasses, ducks with scarves, holiday ducks, ducks in all colors, and as they floated past, I laughed, thinking it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. Hey guys, I called down to the others who were playing cards in the galley. Come check this out. Max popped up first, as if he expected trouble. When he saw our little escort of colorful plastic borders, however, he laughed too. It was hard not to. The sight of all those ducks bobbing on the surface was just so weird. It was almost a little too weird. What were these ducks doing out here anyway? The longer I watched them bobbing around, the more it made me kind of nervous as well. Where'd they all come from? Why were they suddenly all around us? It was easy to laugh at them if you didn't ask questions, but hard not to feel creeped out when you stopped to think about why they were here. Why are there so many ducks out here? Asked Jared, watching them flow around the ship as they roiled in the dark water. Well, it could be that they're testing ocean currents and swell patterns. Max had taken the wheel again, a large wave splashing against the bow and sending a few of the ducks onto the deck. He gave Raj a weird look, though. What? Ocean current patterns. Sometimes oceanography institutes will release a bunch of rubber ducks and watch wave patterns and changes in tidal flow. They've got little trackers in them so they can plot their course, which helps them decipher currents and stuff. Jared picked up one of the ducks and squeezed it, eliciting a friendly squeak from the smiling toy. Seems like it'd be bad for the environment. Wouldn't it lead to all kinds of environmental problems? Raj furrowed his brow as Jared squeaked it again before tossing it into the water. He started picking them up and throwing them into the black soup, a few of them skipping across the surface before disappearing into the night. I realized We'd been a little farther from the coast than Max had meant for us to be, though I could still see it. The lights were far away and ethereal. That is weird. The ones they usually use are made out of cork or something biodegradable. Even if they're rubber, they usually don't squeak. We watched them come rolling in as the waves got progressively higher. Something was stirring up the water not too far from us, and Max seemed to be steering us towards it. When I mentioned this, he said he just wanted to see what it was. His curiosity piqued. Might be a ship in distress or something. Maybe we could help him. He had some idea of being a big hero or something, but I wasn't sure that we could do anything if it was a big transport ship. They'd have a lot more people than our little boat could hold. A boat that sometimes felt a little full with 4 people on board. We cruised between a pair of buoys, heading into open water as we looked for the source of the turbulent water and the ducks. The rope color made it pretty clear that the area was dotted with reefs and sandbars, and the little islands that dotted the area made it even clearer that caution was required out here. It'd be real easy to come up on a sandbar and scrape our hull or blow our bottom out on a reef, and then we'd be floating on driftwood all the way to the rental agency to explain how we'd taken our boat somewhere unadvisable. We came up with a little inlet, the GPS telling us we were entering a major transport lane, and that was when we found the source of the ducks. Their transport ship had been massive, likely hauling all sorts of things. Most of it was sinking to the bottom of the ocean. The ship was in the process of joining its cargo, and as it capsized, it was sending up massive waves and tidal surges. The ducks were coming out of a container that had broken open, and as it slipped beneath the water, it spewed out the floating little knickknacks as they scattered on the surface, pushed by the waves. That should have been the scariest part, the sinking ship, but it couldn't hold a candle to the massive tentacles that were wrapping around the hull and dragging it under. They were hard to make out in the dark of the night, but their undersides were cream-colored and covered in suction cups. They were massive, rising into the air as they came slithering from the depths of the ocean. Even from our position, over 100 feet away, I didn't think any of us felt safe. We were on this creature's turf, bobbing on the surface of its hunting ground, and if it wanted us, there was nothing we could do about it. "We need to go," Raj whispered, as if he was afraid the thing could hear him. "We need to go while it's still mangling that ship." Max agreed, and as we pulled away as quietly as we could, the rest of us kept a close eye on those rising tentacles as they descended into the ocean with the remains of the cargo ship. As we came slowly through the reefs and the bars, we kept expecting to feel a tentacle latch around us and drag us down. The ducks just kept coming, the waves of colorful toys no longer as whimsical as they had been. We had been planning to anchor for the night around midnight, but when I sat up out of a stupor the next day and discovered we were pulling into New Orleans, it wasn't a surprise. None of us had said as much, but I think we were all feeling a little less than safe out here after what we'd seen the night before. The rental company told us they couldn't give us a refund for the days we hadn't used, but we told them that was fine. I didn't feel safe until my feet were on solid ground again, and I've never been happier to live in a landlocked state. We had fun with the rest of our trip, exploring the Big Easy and taking in the sights and smells of the city, and after a few nights of leisure, we started to wonder if it had all really happened. Maybe we'd just gotten spooked by all those rubber ducks after having a little too much to drink. Maybe we had a group hallucination. Maybe we just seen something shadowy out in the ocean and jumped to conclusions. 2 nights later, though, while drinking in a little hole-in-the-wall bar, we discovered that it hadn't been just drunken delusions. We were all laughing after our 3rd or 4th pitcher of beer when Raj suddenly sat up a little straighter and looked at one of the TVs behind the bar. He went over to it, asking the barman to turn it up, and as we followed behind him, we caught the tail end of a news report about a ship that had recently gone missing on its way to New Orleans. The story had a picture of a large cargo ship. A ship that we had all watched get drug into the water a few nights ago. And the news lady was talking about how it was a huge mystery for local sailors. The ship, nearly 100% automated except for a crew of 10, was lost at sea somewhere off the coast of Louisiana. While several cargo containers have been found off the coast as well, the ship itself has seemingly vanished. Residents in the area have been inundated with rubber ducks for the last few nights, and there's concern that the ship may have sunk and been pulled out by an errant current. They showed the footage of a massive amount of rubber ducks washing up on the beach near Long Beach. Watching those ducks go in and out with the waves made me anxious in a way I couldn't explain, but didn't need to. It was pretty clear that everyone here was feeling the same, and when the newscaster moved on to another story, we ordered another pitcher and returned to our table. The festivities were definitely a little muted after that, and it was decided that boating was right out for our future trips. I think maybe we'll go to Vegas next year. Vegas sounds nice, especially after what we saw. Good afternoon, beautiful. Paul had rushed home from work, just like he had every day for the past 2 weeks. Reagan and Frank had said something about drinks after their shift, but he'd barely heard them. He had only one thought on his mind, the same thing he had for the past 2 weeks. Lisa. Man, you're falling way too hard for this gal, Frank had told him, as he made the usual excuses. You don't even know what she looks like, he added, before Paul could make his escape. Sure I do, Paul protested, and turned to go. 5'5", 100 pounds even, long brown hair, B-cup with mossy green eyes, and a love of classical music. Reagan had scoffed. I didn't ask what her profile said, man. He'd rolled his eyes and took another puff off his cigarette. I asked if you knew what she looked like. She looks like an angel, boys, and this angel's waiting for me. And with that, he'd been off. He'd rushed home through 2 blocks of busy Chicago streets to sink happily into his chair and find her online. Lisa. Just saying her name made his heart race. Lisa had found him, actually sought him out after reading something he'd posted on a forum. They started talking, and from day one it seemed like they had known each other for years. It seemed as though years themselves had passed by while she was with him, though it could have been seconds. Nothing else mattered when she was online. He went to bed later and later each night, not wanting to stop talking to her for a second. And strangely, she didn't seem to mind at all. She was as smitten with him as he was with her. A perfect match. Hi, Polly. Rough day today? She was so cute. After 2 weeks, Paul had been hard-pressed to find anything he didn't like about her. The way she called him Polly, the way she always asked about his day, the way she always remembered important things he'd told her, even when he couldn't, the way her words seemed to smile at him. She was something he'd always wanted. She was everything he'd always wanted. Much better now that you're here, Lisa, he said. Aw, you're such a teaser. I've been waiting for my Polly all day, and now I finally have you. You sure do. I'm all yours, baby. The scream of the alarm clock brought him back to reality. It had been such a good night last night, but now it was time for another fun-filled day of work. Last night, just thinking about it made his heart race again. They had talked till almost dawn. He'd only stopped when his eyes had gotten heavy and finally betrayed him. She was a technician, his Lisa. She just kept on talking, kept on laughing, only wanting more of him. He felt his face redden as he lurched into the kitchen and turned on the tiny television by the counter. A man in a gray suit was pointing at a weather map and talking about the weekend weather as Paul poured milk on his sugar flakes. The man was finishing up his report as Paul leaned against the counter, and the camera turned back to a bubbly young woman and a middle-aged man dressed in a similar gray suit. For those of you just joining us, our top story remains the murder of the mayor and his wife early this morning. Police responded to screams in the early morning hours and found both victims stabbed multiple times. Though the murder weapon like much else about the murder, has not been released. Police have said that they have a suspect in custody. Pretty unsettling stuff, wouldn't you say, Megan?" The bubbly brown-haired woman on his side nodded fervently. "Unsettling indeed. The murders come just a week after the mayor's inflammatory remarks concerning the rights of ID workers after their second week on strike. He was a firm opponent of artificial rights in—" But Paul turned it off and put the empty bowl in the sink. The news was so depressing these days. People being murdered in their own homes. These damn ID workers thinking they could demand rights all of a sudden. And to top it all off, there was so much anti-ID sentiment that the city was becoming a melting pot of chaos. "At least I've got my Lisa. The struggles of the world don't mean much as long as I've got her," he said to himself. Paul beamed all the way to work. He passed other people on the street, making their way to work, home, or wherever they were going this time of morning. He didn't care. He was on cloud 9. He just really didn't have time to pay any more attention. He had a checklist of things he needed to get done today, and as he rounded 8th Street and proceeded to Wellington, he ticked them off. He had a meeting at 1 to prepare for. He'd be introducing his product findings for the quarter. Then at 3, he had his next quarter numbers to send to the boss. Then it was home to spend his evenings in the virtual embrace of Lisa. Somewhere along the way, he'd see his friends, have lunch, pick up dinner, but that too seemed secondary next to the idea of talking to Lisa. He sighed, wishing it were 3 already. There was a big crowd outside when he arrived, and he could see police tape across the doors. Mr. Marshall, the office director, was talking loudly to a uniformed man, and several officers were carrying out computers, taking fingerprints, removing fragments from the door. Paul slid in next to Frank. As usual, Reagan was late, but it didn't look like anyone would be getting any work done today. "What happened?" Paul asked in a hushed voice, as one of the officers brought a filing cabinet out on a hand dolly. "Seems there was a break-in last night," said Frank, making no effort to keep his voice low. "A break-in? What could anybody possibly want in our office? I mean, we sell computer chips. We don't even keep them on site." "No clue," said Frank, as Reagan slid in next to him. A blonde woman, Paul thought her name was Frances, leaned back and said in a low voice, "Agnes was the first person in this morning. She said the front door to the Human Resource Office was destroyed, and 2 filing cabinets were wrenched open. She thinks they were after files or something." Paul's brow creased as he contemplated the mystery that had suddenly and possibly led to him not having to work today. He smiled a little to himself, thinking that sounded like a pretty good day to him. "And so they gave us the rest of the day off, and tomorrow, with pay. That's wonderful, Polly. I'm glad you got some time to rest after such a stressful week." They had been talking all morning. As lunchtime came around, Paul's stomach made a low, pitiful rumble. He ignored it, though. This was right where he wanted to be. As it rumbled again, though, an idea began to form. "Stomach's trying to tear me away from you," he commented offhandedly. "Oh, do you need to get some lunch?" "Well, actually, I was hoping you'd maybe meet me somewhere. Maybe Gabriel's on 7th? They make a mean hoagie." The message hung for a couple of minutes. "My treat," he added, not liking the silence. I don't know, Polly," she finally said after a few more seconds of silence. "Lisa, if I'm being honest, I like you, and I would like to take our relationship to a more 3-dimensional level. Won't you please consider a date with me?" She hesitated before responding. "I'm sorry, Polly. I'm just not ready yet. There are things about myself I'm not quite comfortable with. I can't face you. Not yet, Polly. Just be patient with me. I'm new to this kind of thing." Polly sighed. "You're a girl worth waiting for, Lisa. A girl as pretty as you can take their time." "Oh, Polly, you always know just what to say to make a girl smile." "So, Paul, how's that lady of yours?" Paul kept his eyes on his computer. This document had to be finished before he left at 3. The break-in had been a week ago, but the office was still trying to get back into their usual routine. "Fine," he said, returning to typing. "So, when's the first date?" Frank asked as he stirred lazily at his coffee. He'd been getting pretty nosy after the break-in, and his questions were becoming suffocating. Between Frank and Reagan, he was lucky to get a moment's peace. They were continuously asking him out for drinks or to stop by unannounced to hang out, which seemed to entail keeping him off the computer and squarely in the real world. He was already irritable from a lack of sleep, and he really didn't need this today. He couldn't say why, but he was sure someone had been on the fire escape last night. He'd woken up several times to a shadow cast across his bed and the foreboding feeling of being watched. The shadow would move as soon as he tried to see what it was, until finally he'd slept facing away from the window and hadn't been bothered for the rest of the night. His conversations with Lisa had gotten more involved as well, to his great joy. The intimacy of the questions often made him blush, and she seemed ravenous to know everything about him. The minutest details seemed to only stoke the flames of her curiosity, and Paul felt giddy as she shared more of herself with him. Meetings, however, remained a shaky bit of ground. "We haven't set one," he said curtly, as he continued about his business. It was getting late, nearly 3, and his work wasn't done. He'd have to stay late to finish, and that was precious time that he couldn't spend with Lisa. "Geez, Paul, you've been talking to this gal for a month now, and you still haven't met her?" "I don't recall asking your opinion on my relationship, Frank," Paul snapped, and instantly felt ashamed. "Sorry, I'm just tired. I didn't sleep well last night again." He didn't dare tell anyone about the shadow. People would think he was nuts. "It's fine, buddy. I can tell you're hurting for sleep. I just don't want to see you get burned, you know? These gals online find a nice guy like you, and they bleed him dry, Paul. Can we change the subject?" Paul begged. Frank nodded, taking the hint. "You hear about the disappearance of that scientist from the facility?" Of course Paul had. It was all over the news. They think now that the ID might have been involved. You know, our company had something to do with them in the first place, so maybe they think we need a little revenge on our own." Paul was about to say this really wasn't a topic for work when the clock struck 3, and Paul happily filed his report away and turned his computer off for the night. "Another fun-filled evening with your make-believe lady?" Frank asked, and Paul pulled his windbreaker on over his work shirt. "Lisa's a real person, Frank. I wish you could see her the way I do sometimes. Then maybe you'd stop with all these stupid questions." Frank scoffed. "Make sure you get some sleep, buddy. You look kind of beat." "Thanks, Mom," Paul said, as he threw his messenger bag over his shoulder and headed for the door. As he neared his apartment, Paul saw an unfamiliar woman near the mailboxes. She was bent at the knee, reading the names on the mailboxes through squinted eyes. Her long brown hair tumbled down her back, and she was dressed simply in a green t-shirt and cut-off jeans. She was gorgeous by anyone's standards, and she was receiving a good number of stares from the passers-by. Paul realized with embarrassment that he was one of them. He shook himself out of his daze. Lisa would be waiting for him. As he walked towards the door, though, the woman straightened suddenly and looked at him oddly. "Polly?" she said excitedly. "Lisa?" The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. Subconsciously, he had known it was her, but he hadn't dared to hope it could be true. She hugged him briefly, and he returned the gesture. Her arms were certainly firm for someone so small, he thought, as she crushed him against her. She definitely wasn't as big a homebody as he'd thought, and he reflected that making her mad might be a bad idea. "It's so nice to finally meet you in person. I was worried when I couldn't find your name on the mailboxes." Paul could only look at her with astonishment. She was here. She was finally here. Her hands were in his. Her voice was like honey poured over a sonnet. Her hair tumbled easily down the back of her neck in warm, thick sheets. Her eyes seemed to smile at him from under her bangs. She was a vision, a goddess. Paul could feel the blood pumping in his ears as she spoke. The edges of his world were blurring. "Paul, is everything okay?" He sighed, clearing the butterflies from his stomach. "I'm just so surprised you're here." She smiled and placed a delicate finger to her cheek, crooking the other under her chin. "Is it a good surprise?" she asked coyly. He grinned. "The best." "Are you sure I can't make you something to eat?" Paul had easily made enough pasta for 5 people, let alone 2. His attention had been elsewhere, on that perfect goddess that sat in his dining room. She seemed drawn to him too, never looking away, never tiring of his face, as he stood there at the stove, cooking the only dish he knew. Bachelor life was tough, but spaghetti was easy. "Oh, no, it's fine. I already ate before I came," she said quickly. Paul spun his fork absent-mindedly as she continued to stare at him. He popped a roll of spaghetti in his mouth and gasped. It was hot. The noodles burned the roof of his mouth suddenly, and his hands groped for his wineglass. She giggled, and he took a long sip as he grimaced at the bitter taste of cheap wine. "Do I distract you that much?" she asked innocently. Paul grinned sheepishly. "Kind of a lot. I hate to think you had to walk all the way here just to see me. You should tell me next time, and I'll..." He remembered something then. "Well, I guess I won't be able to walk you here since I don't think you've ever told me where you live." "No, it's fine. I don't mind. Any excuse to see you," she purred as she dodged the question. They both blushed, and Paul took another bite of spaghetti. His heart was pounding. What was she doing here? Not that he wasn't pleased to see her after a month of conversations, but a woman like this could have any man she wanted. Why would she settle for a lowly cubicle jockey like me, he thought. "So, did you find the place okay?" he asked, hoping to break the silence. "Oh yeah, it was quite a nice walk. I'm jealous you get to see this every day to work. The stores are likely just opening when you head out, and I can only imagine what kind of smells and sounds you must hear." Paul took another bite and then another as she spoke. When had he told her where he worked? Or for that matter, where he lived? He tried to remember as she went on and on about the scenery, but he just couldn't remember. His face must have said more than he meant it to, because she looked at him and asked, "What are you thinking about so hard, Polly?" And then it was all gone. She laid her fingers across her cheek again and cocked her head just so, and he was putty in her hands. "Oh, nothing. I thought maybe we could watch a movie." "I hope you have something romantic," she said, with a little giggle. So she just showed up out of the blue. "That's right," Paul said, triumphant. He'd met Frank and Reagan for lunch at one of the sports bars near his apartment. They'd wanted to watch the Bears play, and neither was well stocked for food at their place. The sports bar was packed, likely more Bear fans, and the noise was deafening. It was so surreal. She just showed up, out of the blue, and stayed with me all night. He could feel his face turning red, but he couldn't let them see. "All night, huh?" Reagan said with a grin. Paul laughed. "Not like that. We just sort of sat around and enjoyed each other's company." "Uh-huh," said Reagan, unconvinced. Frank seemed thoughtful, though, so she just showed up. Paul looked at him. "Yeah? Funny. Thought you said she was nervous about meeting you." "I guess she got over it," Paul said with a shrug. "Funny how you never mentioned switching addresses with this mystery girl." Paul furrowed his brow. "That's right, yeah. Come to think of it, I didn't remember giving her my address. I suppose I must have forgotten, though. We've been talking for months. It was bound to come up." "And your work, too? Did that come up all of a sudden?" A chill ran down Paul's spine. "Now that you mention it... Hey, what's with the third degree here, Frank? Doesn't strike you as odd that this girl just showed up out of the blue without being invited and without being told where you live or where you work? This is Chicago, Paul. Do you have any idea what the chances of meeting someone at a specific time and place with no clue where that place is are? 1 in a million, just like this girl," Paul chuckled. "Be serious, Paul. You may think this is endearing, but we have a word for people like that, and it's called stalker. You..." But he faltered as a shadow fell across the table. Paul looked up and into the wet, moss-colored eyes of his angel. Lisa was there, carrying a glass of beer and wearing a Bears jersey. She had obviously heard the conversation. Paul barely got her name out before she was running for the door of the crowded bar, beer crashing to the floor in a foamy wave. "Lisa, wait! Lisa!" Paul was on his feet and after her in a second. He pushed through the crowd of people, most cursing and shouting in his wake, but as he exited to the street, he found no trace of Lisa. "No," he sobbed, grabbing the building for support. She was gone. She'd run away from him, and now he'd never see her again. His stomach felt like he'd swallowed a hot brick. Tears came unbidden to his eyes. "Dude, I'm sorry," said Frank. I didn't mean to." Paul didn't remember slipping it to the ground, but Frank's hand was reaching for him, and he slapped it away angrily. "Next time, why don't you just keep your goddamn mouth shut?" he shouted as he lurched to his feet and began running for his apartment. Paul sighed as he walked home after another busy day at the office. It had been 5 days. 5 days since his fight with Frank. 5 days since he'd seen Lisa's tear-streaked face. She hadn't been online at all. No emails or visits either, and Paul was beginning to worry that he would never see her again. She had looked so upset at the bar, he wondered if she truly thought he believed Frank's suspicions. Frank. There was another mystery. No one had seen or heard from Frank since Saturday. He hadn't shown up to work all week, and Reagan said there was no answer at his apartment. As mad as Paul had been at Frank for his ill-timed outburst, he couldn't pretend he wasn't worried about him. They had been friends for years, and his disappearance was more than a little unsettling with all the ID intolerance going on. Paul sighed as his key scraped the lock. What was he going to do? He'd lost his best friend and the love of his life in one fell swoop. The red light was blinking on his machine when he got home, and when he pressed it, the voice he expected to hear wasn't there. Polly, it's Lisa. I know I have a lot to answer for, but I was wondering if you'd like to come over so I can try to explain what's been going on. Her address followed, along with some directions. Paul listened to the message 4 times, drinking in the sound of her voice, and there was hurt in it that almost brought Paul to tears. They made him feel guilty as he left his apartment and trekked the familiar path downtown. Lisa lived in a large brick building in one of the nicer parts of the city. He found her apartment easily, and when he knocked, a little voice told him to come in. As he entered, he couldn't help but notice the long red streak up the floor. Paul had never seen blood, but he'd seen enough cop dramas to know what the start of a crime scene looks like. A chill swept over him as he entered. She was sitting on the couch, a fire burning in the grate. She turned to look at him, and her angelic face was a welcome sight. As she spread her arms wide and ran to him, Paul was surprised that he didn't cringe away from her, especially since her hands were caked in blood. I'm so sorry, Paul. I'm sorry for everything, but it's okay now. No one will stop us from being together. Paul saw over her shoulder that the red streak led to the nearby bathroom, and the bottom fell out of his stomach. Lisa, what have you done? Her face clouded up, and tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. I had to, Paul. I had to kill him. He was suspicious of me. He'd been suspicious of me from the start. If he kept digging, he would find out I was the one who broke into your office, and Paul pushed her away gently but firmly. Wait, that was you? I was intrigued by you, Paul. I had to know more. I had to. I had to see you, hear you, know you without you seeing me. I had to be sure, Polly. I had to be sure I could trust you. Lisa, you're the one that's been coming to my window at night, aren't you? She looked away, ashamed. You stole my address, my phone number. You broke into my office just a what, Lisa? What did you hope to gain? She was crying again, and when she looked up at him, he could see her honesty as she answered, You, Paul, you're all I've ever wanted. You're all I ever hoped to gain. His blood ran cold. His breath came out in troubled gasps. He felt like someone was tearing his lungs out. How could this angel be so tainted? A criminal? A stalker? A killer? Why would you do this, Lisa? Why would you... But he stopped. She had taken his breath away again. Her hands had begun to deftly pull behind her hair, bringing her face away from it. Her perfect face had fallen away like a Halloween mask, and she had brushed away the stray strands that clung to her. As the fleshy roll hung from her neck, Paul could see a pill-shaped metal cylinder staring back at him through 2 yellow-tinted eyes. When she spoke, no mouth opened, but her voice was still Lisa's. Because I'm not human, Paul. Because there are people who don't think I deserve a normal life. Paul took a step back, horror spreading across his face. What are you? He breathed, his breath coming out in gasps, like someone had punched him in the stomach and never pulled their hand away. Why, Paul? Don't you remember? I'm Lisa, L-model intimacy servo automaton, and I'm all yours, Polly. When I stepped into the little room, I thought I had come to the wrong place. I have AOADD, Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder. If that sounds made up, it's because it's pretty rare, from what I understand. Most people get ADD when they're kids, but very few of them are diagnosed once they're my age. In fact, it's something like 1% of people, from what I understand. When I was a kid, I was never prone to any of the hyperactivity or attention problems that my peers had. I never needed medication or structure to help me pay attention while I was in class. I did really well in school and did really well in my working life, right up until I was about 34. Then suddenly, I had the hardest time paying attention. I couldn't focus on much of anything, not even for the short term. I would find my mind wandering while I was at work, and eventually, I got fired. I couldn't concentrate long enough on my work to get anything done. I tried to find another job, but anything I managed to get ended the same way. I couldn't even pay attention long enough to flip hamburgers, and my resume was soon in shambles. At home, I struggled to relate to my family. Television shows, sporting events, the day-to-day things no longer held my attention. I was aware of this, aware that I was losing my wife and kids, but I couldn't pay attention to that either. It was like being trapped just behind your eyes and having to watch as you lose everything. After my wife left and took the kids, I decided it might be time to go see a doctor. This was a little different than just the general malaise that I sometimes found with life, and I needed help. My doctor told me about the Adult Onset Attention Deficit Disorder and prescribed medication and some supplements. He helped me fill out the paperwork and get on disability. The disability paid for my housing. My wife had taken our house in the divorce, and the disability made them go easy on me when it came to child support. I wasn't just a lazy slob, I had a medical condition, and I was trying to overcome it. None of the medication worked, the supplements either, and nothing they suggested seemed to help with my attention problems. After a while, my doctor recommended a support group, and I told him I'd give it a try. When I came to my first session, I wasn't sure that I had made the right call. The meeting room was covered with pictures of a man, hand drawings, and police sketches, all of them with the caption, "Have you seen this man?" I wondered who he was, the whole thing feeling a bit tinfoil hattish, but I had to admit that the man looked a little familiar. I was still staring at him when the organizer called me out, looking up when the man asked if I had AOADD. When I told him I did, he nodded and told me I was in the right place. So I took a seat with the other 5 or 6 people there and decided to give it a try. "So, why don't you tell us about your trigger moment?" "My what?" I asked, not sure what he was talking about. "Your trigger moment. Everyone in the group has one. It's the moment you realize that you had a problem with attention. It'll sound a little weird, but it may surprise you to learn that a lot of our trigger moments are very similar." I thought about it, like really racking my brain, but I couldn't come up with much of anything. My doctor had never said anything about a trigger moment, and this was something new. My attention issues had just kind of happened, and I couldn't think of anything that had caused it. The man leading the meetings, a middle-aged guy with salt and pepper hair, nodded and said that was normal. "Charlie," he said, looking at a bearded guy who was dressed like somebody's dad at an amusement park, "why don't you talk about your trigger moment? Maybe it'll help him figure it out." Charlie nodded, interlocking his fingers as he put them across his lap. "I was walking down Main Street when a man suddenly called out to me from a nearby park bench. He asked if I would mind giving him my attention, just like that, and I nodded, saying I would. I figured he just wanted money. Most of the guys that call out to you from park benches want money. But after I agreed to give him my attention, he nodded and just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird, wondered what the hell that had been about, but as I walked, I realized I couldn't focus on the fantasy football team I had been planning. I'd been thinking about the game coming up. I was really big into fantasy football back then, and the team I had put together was doing really well. I had been going over my roster for next week. My team was about to go into the semifinals, and it was weird to realize that the roster would no longer hold my attention. I just kind of wandered around, not really thinking about anything in particular. And that's how it started. After that, I couldn't really pay attention to anything. I lost my job, I lost my girlfriend, and now I just kind of float around most of the time. That trigger moment, the moment in time when I met the man, seems to be the only thing I can really concentrate on anymore. I can remember it with crystal clarity, but everything else is like catching water in a sieve. I can think about something for a moment or two, maybe even for as long as a half an hour, but eventually, it's gone. I live out of a van now. You might have seen it when you pulled up to the rec center, and I only have it because the guy took my money and handed me the keys, and I didn't have to sign anything. It's not registered. The cops have ticketed me a dozen times or more, and it's only a matter of time before they take that too, I guess. The group nodded at him like this was the most normal thing they had ever heard, and when they all looked at me expectantly, as if I had my own story to tell, I just shook my head. There was something, though, a tickling in the back of my mind, but nothing yet. "Melissa, why don't you go next?" He never asked a question, never asked people if they wanted to share, and all of his statements were just that. He wasn't asking them if they wanted to put their story out there. He was telling them that it was time to share information. I was working as a waitress at a lunch counter. It was the middle of the day, the lunch rush was in full swing, and I barely even looked at the guy when he came and sat down at the counter. I walked over and asked if I could get him something. He said all he wanted was my attention, just a little attention. When I said he had it, he just got up and walked away. I thought it was weird. The guy had wanted my attention and then he left, but that was how it started. I'm not quite as bad as some of the people in the group. I can still hold on to my attention for about 40% of the time. Sometimes, however, I'll just lose all ability to pay attention to anything. My doctor recommended this group, thinking it might stop it from getting worse, but I think it's as bad as it'll ever get. After all, the man only asked for a little of my attention, not all of it. I stopped her after that, asking if she was serious. She said she was, and I looked at the group organizer with a raised eyebrow. Are you trying to tell me that these two had their attention stolen by, what, some kind of demon or something? The organizer shook his head emphatically. No, not a demon. I don't believe in heaven or hell, but I do believe in this man and what he's doing. I don't know what he is, some highly persuasive psychic, some kind of creature from outside our reality, or just some Orwellian thought criminal who's figured out how to perpetrate the worst crime imaginable. But he is the string that holds everyone together, and he seems to like this area the best. I got up, meaning to leave, but the organizer stopped me with a few words. You met him too, didn't you? I had my hand on the door, but his statement had made me think again about where I had seen the man on the poster. I saw you recognizing him when you came in. Everyone does, but they don't always remember right away. He's sneaky, a very easy-to-miss man. He's so unassuming that you never think twice about giving him your attention. It's just a turn of phrase, after all. May I have your attention, please? But he means it literally. They never realize what they're giving up when they agree to give him their attention, but he knows full well what he's taking. I was still at the door, my hand around the knob. Even though I didn't believe what he was saying, I couldn't deny one thing. I did recognize the man in the picture. I just couldn't remember where. Larry, why don't you tell your story next? You should have a seat and listen. Larry has a real harrowing tale. I took my seat, curiosity getting the better of me, and looked at Larry as he looked at his cheap Walmart shoes instead of the group. Larry reminded me of the dad from The Honeymooners, an older guy in the comfortable overweight of age. His head was bald, except for a scattering of peach fuzz on top, and I noticed there was a long scar on his left arm that he kept covered with the sleeve of his shirt. There was enough sleeve to do the job. He was wearing a sweatshirt even in the unseasonable heat, but he seemed inadvertently to pluck at it. It was as if the scar itched him, and he needed to scratch it. I was a bus driver for the city. I've been a bus driver for 25 years. I knew my job, I knew my route, and if I'd been a little luckier, I was only about 5 years away from a really good retirement. I was taking on afternoon fares, greeting people as they put in their change and coins in the little slot. When he got on, I told him it was $1.50 to ride the bus, and it was change only. He asked me something, and at the time, I thought he had asked if I had a quarter. Sometimes they didn't have enough, and they asked if they could borrow a quarter or a dime. I told him sure, digging around in my pockets to see if I had some change. But when I looked up with a couple of dimes, the guy was gone. I didn't think anything of it, just slapped the change in the box and got on my way. As I drove, however, I found my attention waning. I couldn't really focus on any one particular thing. I was just looking everywhere, having trouble remembering what I'd been doing. I crashed that bus into rush hour traffic, causing one of the biggest accidents in the city's memory at the time. There were no fatalities, thankfully, but there was enough property damage and medical expenses that the city had little choice but to fire me. I got a portion of my retirement, but nowhere near what I would have got after retiring with the full 30. I feel terrible for what I did, but even that seems to be dulled by the fact that I can't seem to pay attention to anything for more than a few minutes. I have to write down these meetings on a whiteboard so I can even remember that I have to go to them at all. If it wasn't for Kay here, calling us on meeting days and coming to pick us up, most of us wouldn't be here at all. Kay, the organizer, looked back at me and seemed to be inviting me to tell my own story. I still couldn't remember all the details, but something was starting to come back as I listened to them tell their stories. I had been going to get coffee for my boss and some of my friends in the office. They had given me their order, and I had gone to Keeger Coffee to get some Joe. I had been coming back with the cardboard container of coffee, the one for me, balanced in my other hand, when someone had asked if they could have my attention, please. I turned, looking at the guy as he stood on a box with a small crowd gathered around him. It wasn't many, maybe 5 or 6 people, including me, but as he asked the question again, a few of them nodded. I found myself nodding along with them. Kay was right. The question was so harmless that I hadn't thought twice about agreeing to it. It seemed that even a nod was good enough. After 3 or 4 of the people had nodded and stepped in closer, he clapped his hands and stepped down off the box. Then, to the general confusion of the crowd, he simply walked away. Looking at the group again, I realized that one of the people from the crowd was sitting there, and they seemed to have remembered me as well. He was on a street corner, a guy standing on a soapbox. He called for everyone's attention, and a few of us gave it to him. I walked off after he left, not thinking anything of it, but that was when it all started. The guy I had recognized from the crowd was nodding along, looking around as if to show people that he wasn't crazy. Kay was nodding too, and when he spread his hands out, everyone grasped hands, and I found myself joining them. Kay clearly was no victim of the man, and I wondered what his connection was to all this as he reaffirmed to all of us that we were okay, and that it was going to get better. I'm glad that you remembered the man and the moment you lost your attention to him. When I started this group 3 years ago, with Larry there, I knew there would be others. I want to help, I want to heal, and I want to be here for all of you in your time of need. There were nods, some of them thanking him, but I was still curious as to why. Why? If he hasn't affected you, then why do you care? I said, as all of them looked at me. Kay nodded, having expected this. Though I still have my attention, I can assure you that I too have been affected by this man. My father lost his attention to him, you see, about 25 years ago, when I was just a freshman in high school. My father accidentally gave his attention to this man, as he stood at a bus stop a few blocks from here. He told anyone who would listen about the man who had only asked for his attention, screamed it from his bed in the mental hospital, but no one believed him. No one besides me, that is. I've been looking for evidence for years, something to justify my father's stories, and the more of you that I find, the more evidence I get of the man and his existence. I'm so proud of you, of all of you, for being brave enough to come here today and share your stories. They all started to clap, but I didn't join in. So what do we do now? I asked, as the applause died down. Kay cocked a head at me. What do you mean? I mean, if we know this man is stealing our attention, then why don't we find him and get it back? The others shook their heads, and I realized I probably wasn't the first person to think of that. Kay sat back, shaking his head morosely, and told me to put the idea out of my mind. But why? We can find him. You said he likes to hunt in this area, so why don't we just go after him? Because no one who tries ever finds him, or they never come back. They either fail to find him and go crazy trying to get back what they lost, or they find him and he does something to them. Maybe having their attention gives him some kind of power over them. Maybe he just does something worse to them. No one knows. This group is a safe place, a support group for those who are suffering from what he did to them. I never wanted to see anyone else live the way my father did, strapped to a hospital bed so he wouldn't wander off and hurt himself. I help people who have been hurt by the man, helping them lead a normal life. Well, as normal a life as they can. I feel that it's my sacred duty to help people, to try and get something back after what he's taken from them. But there's no getting back what he's taken. I hope you'll join us in that. There is, after all, safety in numbers. The meeting ended shortly thereafter, and as I said my goodbyes and watched Kay pack up the snacks, I covertly took one of the photos off the wall. I know he said that once I remembered, the memory would be crystal clear, but I didn't want to risk forgetting what this guy looked like. I can't share in Kay's optimism, and I can't stand by and do nothing if this man is the one who has affected my life in such a way. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what happens to me. I'll tattoo it on the back of my hand if I have to, so I can force myself to concentrate anytime I begin to slip. I will find this man, the strange creature who steals what is most important to us, and I will have my attention back, or die trying. I knew there was no way I could have seen him, but I could swear I saw my old dog, Blue, standing near the fence of Sanders' farm. I work out of town, the town I grew up in being pretty tiny, and I have to pass Sanders' farm anytime I come home from work. Sanders' farm has been a landmark since before I was born, and it grows most of the produce for town. Herschel Sanders runs a very successful produce stand in town, and sells crops to grocery stores all over the state. He's a bit of a local celebrity, and he seems to be the only person in town doing well for himself besides Cotton's Antiques. He also owned the farm my parents were supposed to have dropped Blue off to when I was a kid. Blue had been a good dog, a great companion for a kid my age, but maybe a little too rambunctious for my parents' liking. He'd been a mutt with pointy ears, a thick coat of soft brown fur, and a pair of green, inquisitive eyes that never seemed to get tired of darting around for something to chase or catch. I loved him, but for two adults in a small house, we lived in an apartment at the time, he must have been a nightmare. The day he bit Tommy was probably one of the worst days I remember, so, of course, it was indelibly etched in my memory forever. Tommy was a lot older than me or my friends. He was 12, and we all lived in fear of him. Whenever he strode onto the little playground area off the apartment complex, 5'8" and broad in the chest, we all usually left to go play somewhere else. Unfortunately, on that day, I was playing alone on the basketball court, and didn't have time to escape. I'd been shooting baskets. I wanted to join the elementary school basketball league next year, so I wanted to get good. That's when Tommy came striding up. Blue was panting about good-naturedly, but looked up when he saw Tommy coming. He was always alone, never having any chums to play around with, and that should have been a red flag to any adult that had been watching. Even the most brutal of children have someone to pal around with, but Tommy was too antisocial and stupid mean for even other bullies to accept. "What you doing, sissy?" he asked, dragging out his limited insults he reserved for sissies or babies. I told him I was just shooting baskets, and he sneered like that was the silliest thing he'd ever heard. "That's not how you get better, stupid. Why don't you play me one-on-one? That'll get you better quicker." I agreed, thinking maybe he had decided to be friendlier. Nothing could have been further from the truth. The game started out with him taking the ball from me and scoring point after point. I was smaller than him, so it was easy for him to steal the ball from me and rack up points while I stumbled around. After a while, I started developing some strategies to get around him though, and I started making some points on my own. Before I knew it, we were nearly tied, and this was unacceptable to Tommy. The game had been dirty before, but now it was downright brutal. The first time he pushed me, I heard Blue growl a warning. The second time he pushed me, I heard Blue snarl at him. On the third time, his fist coming down to crack me on the side of the head, I heard him yell as Blue sank his teeth into Tommy's backside. Tommy cried out, telling me to get my dog off him. I was shocked. I'd never seen Blue bite anyone. He hung onto the back of his jeans, worrying at him, as Tommy ran off the blacktop towards his house. He let him go as his sneakers left the court, and I laughed about it then, Blue grinning his doggy grin as he came back to rub against my hand. When the police arrived at my house later that day, I didn't think it was so funny. They told us that Tommy's parents had reported a dog bite. Specifically, they had reported that Blue had bitten their son, and now the police had come to take him away. I told them my side of the story, all the while clutching Blue around the neck, but it didn't seem to make any difference to them. A dog had bit, and now he had to be put down. I think Dad saw that I was getting really upset, because he agreed to take Blue to the police station and said he wouldn't let them put him to sleep unless I got to say goodbye. This soothed me a little, but I was still pretty upset as I watched my dog walk away for the last time. When Dad came back, it was already nighttime, but he seemed a little happier. He told me that he had come to an understanding with the police officers, and they had let him drop Blue off at Sanders' farm. Dad said that Mr. Sanders usually took in troubled dogs, or dogs that were going to be put down, and let them work on his farm as farm dogs. That way, Blue could live there, and he wouldn't have to be put to sleep. He'll have all kinds of room to run around, much more room than this little apartment, and he'll be happy, Dad had said. I was ecstatic. I was sad that Blue couldn't live with us anymore, but at least the police wouldn't have to put him to sleep. I asked Dad if we could go visit him sometime, to see how he was doing, and Dad said we would see. I went to bed that night and dreamed about Blue as he ran on the farm, herding sheep and running off crows and enjoying his life now that he had a lot of space to play in. I asked Dad a few times if we could go see Blue, but it never seemed to be a good time. Dad always said things like he didn't want to distract him while he was at work, or he didn't want to make it hard for him to settle in by reminding him about his old family. I understood these things. They made sense, but I really wanted to see Blue again. I remember asking a handful of times, but like most kids, my attention span was pretty limited. I got a new game console that year for Christmas. I made the basketball team, so I had to practice almost every day. I was getting ready to go to middle school, so I was a little worried about that. And after a while, I just sort of forgot about Blue. I never really forgot about him. I still thought about him sometimes, in that vague way that kids often do, but I just stopped asking to go see him. Eventually, I guess I stopped thinking about him. Until today, when I saw him on the fence, I hadn't honestly thought about him in years. I was heading to dinner with my parents after work, so I figured I'd let them know what I'd seen. They might like knowing that Blue was okay, and that he was still living a good life. Mom opened the door for me when I knocked, and invited me to help finish fixing dinner. As I chopped vegetables for a salad, I told her what I'd seen, but she didn't seem to understand. The chunk of the knife seemed soothing as it cut the vegetables, and I told her that I'd seen Blue running around the farm where we'd left him. She still seemed a little confused, not really understanding what I was talking about, and when Dad came in, I told him as well. Dad didn't seem confused at all, though. Quite the contrary, he looked a little scared. "You saw Blue at Sanders' farm?" "Yeah, just where you said you dropped him off. He looked really happy. He was running around, chasing birds, and living his best life. He looked up when I drove past and almost seemed to recognize me. I was thinking that I might go visit him, see if he's still... Kid, Dad stated, cutting me off. That's impossible. I guess you're right, I said, thinking it over as we talked about it. Blue would have to be 20 years old by now. Maybe it's one of his puppies. It looks just like him. I might stop by anyway, see if maybe Mr. Sanders will sell me one of Blue's puppies. It would be nice to have a reminder of old Blue around the apartment. My dad sat down heavily, and that made me look up at him with real worry. He seemed like he was debating something, or maybe having a hard time accepting something. I was worried for a minute that he might be having a heart attack. He'd had one last year, and after that his heart hadn't exactly been stable. Instead, he just looked up at me like he might have seen a ghost or something. That's not possible, because Blue is dead. I looked at him in shock. How do you know? Did Mr. Sanders tell you when he didn't have to. Blue died the night I took him to the police station. We put him down. My head spun a little. Had they been lying to me this whole time? Dad had told me he'd taken Blue to the farm. He had stuck to that story till eventually I forgot. Had he just been telling me a lie to stop me from being upset? Why had he told me about taking Blue to the farm at all? Sit down. I think it's time I tell you the truth. It's the truth you may have to face yourself one day, so it's best you hear it now. I sat down, keeping a close eye on my old man, who suddenly seemed less trustworthy than he had a few minutes ago. People in this town always say that they're taking their dogs to the farm. It's been a tradition for at least as long as I can remember. My own dad told me he was taking my dog Scout to Sanders' farm when he got too old and too sick. He said that Scout could run and play for as long as he wanted, and the country air would do him some good. My daddy had never lied to me before, at least not that I knew of, and I was happy that Scout could live somewhere where he could get better. He was old and really sick. I wasn't quite ready to say goodbye to him yet, though. Daddy said we could visit him, but we never did. Eventually, just like you, I kind of forgot about him and went on with my life. I sat in silence, not really sure what to make of all this. So Granddad had lied as well, but this seemed to be a generational lie. Why did so many people use Sanders' farm as a place to leave their dogs? Was it a convenient lie? Or was there more to it? Why did you lie to me? I asked, still not happy about being misled. Because I knew that Blue was going to be killed, and I knew that you weren't ready to lose him. Taking him to the farm was just something people tell kids around here. I'd imagine that you have a lot of friends who've had their dogs taken to Sanders' farm over the years. But why? What's the point of it all? Dad seemed to think about this, weighing his options before settling on, you'll understand when you're older, when you have kids of your own. Sanders' farm is an important place in this community for many reasons, some of them not quite known even to the people who use it. I didn't end up staying for dinner. I left, despite my mother's protests, and drove home. I don't know why, but I was just so irrationally mad about being lied to. I realized, of course, that my parents had lied like this before. I've lived with the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, and even a monster that lived in the basement named Mr. Giles, who would get you if you came downstairs after bedtime. They all turned out to be fake, of course. They were lies they told, but lies that they told gently, and only to add magic to my childhood or keep me from doing foolish things. I could understand those lies, but not this one. This one felt different. This one felt personal. I flopped onto the couch when I got home, and John paused his game as he glanced over at me. What's wrong, babe? You look upset. It's nothing, I lied, looking away before finally spilling the whole sad story. I was in tears by the end, my boyfriend holding my hands and patting them gently. He'd grown up here too, and had known my parents only slightly less time than I had. He often gave me some perspective on what was going on, and was my voice of reason in many things. I'm sure your dad had a good reason. He's a good man, and I don't feel like he'd lie to you for no reason. He probably just wanted to protect you. You were 8 after all. He slid his thumbs over the backs of my hands like I liked, and I smiled as I bent forward to kiss his forehead. Thanks, hon. You always know just what to say. John grinned through his beard and reached for the controller again. Boy-friendly duties now complete. Besides, it's not all that weird if you think about it. I cocked an eye at him. What do you mean? Well, that's where my dad took Russell after he got hit by that car. He told me he took him to Mr. Sanders' farm so he could get better, but I guess he never did. That gave me pause. John had basically told me the same story my dad had, and it was a little too similar for coincidence. As John went back to rolling and smashing anything that wandered into his field of vision, I opened my phone and sent a text to my friend Matt. Matt and I had been friends nearly as long as John and I had, and I trusted him as much as I trusted my boyfriend. Hey Matt, just wondering if you've ever heard your parents say anything about taking one of your pets to Sanders' farm. Just curious, trying to settle a bet. The last bit would really hook him. He seemed to like making John look dumb by proving him wrong. I watched John play Elden Ring for a few more minutes before my phone buzzed and I picked it up to see his reply. Wow, that's weird. Yeah, my dad took Snoopy there after he got too old to walk. I haven't thought about that in forever. That's trippy. I thanked him and sent a text to Jane, a friend from work. Jane lived in the next town over, but Kine was still only about 20 minutes from my hometown. I was wondering if this was just a regional thing, or if it extended farther than our little burg. Janet sent back a string of question marks and asked why I needed to know something so weird. I told her it was to settle a bet too, and she told me she'd never had a dog get taken to Sanders' farm. We always just buried them in the backyard, she said. Okay, so maybe it wasn't particularly far-reaching. For the next few hours, as John cursed and growled at the maddening boss he was trying to beat, I sent text after Facebook message after Twitter message and everything in between to old school friends and people I knew from town to ask them if they'd lost dogs too. John's story about Russell had made me realize this was bigger than just my family, and I wanted to know how far exactly. Of the 10 people I got responses from, 6 said their parents had told them they were taking dogs to Sanders' farm. One friend only had cats growing up, and it appeared that they didn't get to live a happy life on Sanders' farm. The other 2 had never been allowed to have pets, so they'd never had anything to lose. The one person whose dog hadn't gone to Sanders' farm had escaped while the family was on vacation, so the whereabouts of the dog were never discovered. The findings were inconclusive, but they were still pretty damn close. Close enough that as John and I climbed into bed that night, I had already decided that I was going to make a stop on my way home from work tomorrow. The plume of dirt that spewed up behind me as I drove up the long driveway to Sanders' farm was the only bell the old farmer seemed to need. He was waiting for me on the porch with a glass of tea, and a weathered old smile spread across his sunburnt face. "Afternoon, kid. What can I do for you?" We shook hands as I introduced myself, and he handed me the glass of tea as I explained why I was there. Mr. Sanders nodded, asking if I'd like to come inside. He didn't seem surprised by the question at all. Quite the contrary. It was as if he'd been waiting for me to come and ask it all this time. I told him that I thought I'd rather sit on the porch and discuss it, and he nodded as he took a seat in one of the old rockers, indicating that I should take the other. Every now and again, someone puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that everyone brings their dogs to Sanders' farm. It's not a new concept. People have been doing it since before the Great Depression. I can't tell you how long it's been going on, but I can tell you how it started if you'd like to hear. I nodded, and he began his story. The first dog to be brought here wasn't really brought at all. His name was Jip, and he was my friend. He was just a pup when I heard him crying one afternoon. He'd gotten himself stuck in a trap, and his pack had deserted him, probably thinking he was done for. He was just a little half-starved thing, but he growled at me as I came to get him loose. Turned out I didn't have to do too much. The trap had nearly tore his front paw off, and he was bleeding out. It seemed a shame to let him die, so I held him down and tied his foot off with a handkerchief. He struggled a lot, snapping and snarling as I tried to stop the bleeding, but eventually he quieted down as the blood oozed out of him and he became less coherent. I scooped him up and took him back home, cutting the little bit of skin off that held his paw on and dressing it as best I could. I was afraid he had died for a little while, but when I heard him come to, snarling and snuffling and howling, I knew he'd likely recover. He smiled as he remembered it, likely thinking of the little wolf pup as he tried to act twice his size. We started off slow, but eventually I earned his trust. His paw would never grow back, but he managed to teach himself to walk with 3 legs. I had done a good enough job of cleaning it up that it didn't get infected, and after a few months, the lack of a paw didn't seem to slow him down. He couldn't return to his pack. I'm not sure he ever even tried, but he was my dog after that, and I loved him. His smile became sad, and I felt we were about to come to the part of the story where he lost that friend. We lived together for about 12 years, both of us growing old as the seasons passed. Jip's gait was slower, and his joints creaked when he walked, but he was still always willing to walk around with me when I did my work. I was in my late 40s, working the land as I do now, when we stumbled upon a bear one day. He had decided to bed down in my corn crib, and when I went down to check my stores, he woke up and charged me. Jip got between us. He was never far from my side, and gave me time to get my rifle. I put the bear down as the three-legged wolf kept him from attacking me, but the damage was done. Jip had been slashed a dozen times, and I sat with him as he lay bleeding on the dirt floor of my storehouse. Mr. Sanders got a far-off look as he watched the sun sink, seeing far-off days as the sun set over his crops. I buried him in the field, the place he loved the most. I'd built him a house, put him a ratty blanket on the porch, but he seemed to love sleeping amongst the swaying corn plants and amidst the dirt of the field. I buried him there, thinking he might nourish the crops as his spirit lay content, but I never could have foreseen what would happen. That night, I heard a loud barking, a barking that sounded like Jip's. I rushed out with my rifle and found him smiling and barking at the edge of the field, good as new. Behind him, though, the crops had grown 4 times as plentiful. Corn and beans and squash and potatoes, everything else I grew in those days, too. Jip looked at me as though to say, "Thanks for a good life," and then he dove back into the field and I never saw him again. That was how it started. "Well, what started?" I asked, feeling my skin prickle. "The crops came in, and I brought my wares to the nearest market. I made enough money to build a new barn, buy a new horse, and eat like a king that winter. There had been enough food to stuff my storehouse, and the excess I'd taken to market was more like a normal yield from any other year. The next year I planted as I had every year, and old Jip brought in another bountiful harvest. I bought more land, made plans to plant an orchard, began to think about buying cattle and sheep. I even thought about becoming some kind of land baron in this underdeveloped part of the country. The next 2 years were just as fine, but I was in for a surprise." He coughed a little and asked me if I'd get him a glass of tea from the kitchen. I obliged, moving into the house and taking a glass from the cabinet as I moved to the battered old fridge. I refilled my own as I poured the cold tea into the new glass. I was suddenly very thirsty, and my throat felt dry as a bone. When I brought it back to him, he thanked me before taking a long sip. After 4 years of amazing yield, the 5th year was a disappointment. The crops did well as they ever did before Jip died, but the bounty was nowhere to be seen. I had just begun planting the fruit trees and just started making inquiries about livestock. I worried that I wouldn't be able to afford any of the plans I'd been making, and that temporary success might just slip through my fingers. The next year was much the same, but I had noticed a small decline in the quality of my produce. There had been no blight, no insects to speak of, but the crops seemed weaker, more feeble this year. I began to panic. What would I do if the field stopped making? What could I do if the vegetables stopped coming? I tried different things that spring to rejuvenate the fields. I bought tonics from a traveling man. I put down fertilizer. I tried increasing the water I gave the fields. The fertilizer, however, had made me remember that I had used something very different to fertilize the land 4 years ago, and that made me wonder if doing so might rejuvenate the fields again. The sun was sinking lower now, the fiery ring just over the tops of the corn as they waved merrily. And so I set out to find a proper sacrifice for the land, something to bring it back again. I tried forest animals. Jip had been of the forest after all, but to no avail. I tried strays from the nearby town, but they did nothing. In my desperation, I'm ashamed to say that I bought and killed animals from the local stableman, even going so far as to buy and slaughter a horse, but they did little to rejuvenate the crop. Then one evening, As I came back from the market with my pathetic yield, I nearly struck a child as he came bounding into the road. The dog with him, just an average mutt, pushed him out of the way, and my tires crunched over the animal. I heard the boy cry out in despair as he cradled the dying dog in his arms. Its back was clearly broken, but I wasted no time. I took the dog with me, driving away quickly as the father came rushing out to see what all the fuss was about. The setting sun cut fire lines across his eyes, and the sting must have been uncomfortable, if not eye-watering. Mr. Sanders seemed not to notice, though. He was dead by the time I arrived home, and I buried him in the field, as I had with Jip. The crops came back, the land thrived, and I think that was when I realized what the land wanted. The old dog had been loved, just as Jip had been loved, and that love seemed to nourish the land like nothing else. From that day on, I seemed to always have my eyes peeled for dogs. The sick ones could sometimes be taken off the owner's hands, but I had been known to buy them from struggling families as well. As the years went by and the town grew, so too did my prosperity. I was one of the largest farmers in the region. My produce sold at every general store and market for miles around. I've seen the horses replaced by automobiles, seen the carts that came to get my food replaced by trucks, and all the while, my fields continue to put out more of the stuff I needed to grow. Ah, but there was a price, and the price has become quite steep over the years. I was still mulling over what he had said, and when he paused to drain the dregs of his glass, I asked the question that had been wavering on the edge of my mind. "Mr. Sanders, how old are you?" Mr. Sanders fixed me with a mischievous grin, and it took years off of him. "Just starting to put it together, eh? I was born in 1815. I bought this land in 1845. The year I buried Jip, I was 45, and I have stayed that age ever since. Despite having more crops than I know what to do with, the land also grants me life for my sacrifice. I can't explain why, and I can't explain how, but I keep living as long as the land thrives." I wanted to deny what he was saying, but I could find no argument against it. The man looked old, sun-weathered, but not ancient. How would he manage to keep from being noticed? If he had really owned this farm for so long, how had no one seen? As my farm grew, so too did the town. The market thrived, the people prospered, and thus began the agreement. I had grown tired of finding my own sacrifices, so I made them a deal. They would bring me their dogs, those who were sick or those who were too old to carry on, and I would continue to make the town flourish. By that time, I was making a sacrifice once a month. Today, I make a sacrifice once a day. Before too long, I fear that it will become unmanageable, and the farm will fail." I said nothing, just sitting and staring, wishing I could believe that this man was crazy. I suppose that wouldn't be too bad. I've grown tired of living and making sacrifices, and maybe it's finally time to rest. Nothing lasts forever after all, not even immortality, he said, grinning. The grin made his face look skeletal, his true age shining through at last. I thanked him for the tea, thanked him for the story, and stood up shakily. "Take care of yourself, kid, and don't worry. Old Blue is as happy as any other dog here. You did what you could for him, and now he's at rest where no one can hurt him ever again." I nodded dumbly, my legs shivering as I walked down the stairs to my car. As I climbed in, I thought I saw a familiar brown snout as it poked from the rows of corn plants. My hands froze halfway to the ignition. He was grinning at me, looking out through the corn and panting happily. It was as if he had come back one last time to say goodbye, and as we locked eyes, he slid slowly back into the field. I've driven by that farm once a day since, but I've never seen Blue again. I do worry, though, about what will happen to all those ghosts if something should happen to Sanders' farm. The crops have begun to look a little different lately, less healthy, more like plants that are rotting from the inside. If the vegetables die, if the farm fails, then what will happen to all those spirits that call the land their home? There was a sign next to the dirt road today that said, "For sale by owner." I suppose soon we may very well find out.